My last words. Hi everyone, my name is Steve. I would like to share my story. I don't need pity or compassion, just one last thing I'd like to say. I want to start with the day my whole life became a nightmare. That evening, as usual, I left the office around 8 o'clock in the evening. I was tired, but at that point I was happy. I can't say there was enough money for everything, but the job seemed promising. My wife, Kate, didn't work. She had to spend all her free time on our 3-year-old son, Pete. The drive home was familiar, but this time it turned tragic. My car was hit by a car with a drunk driver. My memories of the accident were blurry, like footage from a movie that someone had remounted, mixing up the scenes. I remember the bright light of the headlights, the sharp sound of brakes, and the terrible crunch of metal. Then darkness. I came to myself already in the hospital. There was fuss around, doctors' voices, and I could not understand anything. It turned out that I had been in a coma for about 2 weeks. I was told that I had a spinal fracture, my right leg was completely paralyzed, and my left leg could barely move. This news came crashing down on me, burying my entire former life underneath me. The doctors said the chances of a full recovery were minimal. The first days in the hospital proved to be the hardest for me. Pain, despair, fear, everything mixed into one heavy state. I couldn't believe that I would never walk again. It seemed to me that my life was over. But the doctors and nurses encouraged me, assuring me that rehabilitation could help me regain at least some of my lost mobility. At first, my wife came to see me almost every day. She tried to support me, but I could see how hard it was for her. A small child at home, a husband in the hospital, and everyone needs her help. She couldn't cope and started coming to see me less and less, limiting herself to calls or texts. I could feel us drifting apart, but I couldn't blame her for it. The driver who hit me died at the scene of the accident. I had a trial with his family ahead of me, but I had absolutely no energy for that. Compensation would not give me back my ability to walk, no one would give it back to me. The rehabilitation process was difficult and painful. I spent hours every day in the gym trying to regain some control over my muscles. Physical therapy, massages, meetings with a psychologist. It all became an integral part of my life. Gradually I mastered wheelchair control, but returning home was still a dream. I had to spend several difficult months in the hospital. It felt like the whole world had turned its back on me. My wife had to get a job and get into loans to provide for my son and cover hospital expenses. We didn't see each other, and even phone calls were now rare. Finally, after several long months, I came home. My wife greeted me with a smile, but I noticed how hard she was finding it to pretend. My young son, when he saw me in my wheelchair, could not hold back his tears. I tried to comfort him, although I realized that nothing could be done. My wife went to another room so that my son would not see her tears too. Moving home was the beginning of a new stage of adaptation. Our house had to be completely remodeled to accommodate my new needs. We installed ramps for easy ingress and egress, widened doorways so the stroller could pass through freely, and outfitted the bathroom with special handrails and seats. Each change took time and a significant financial investment. Debts were mounting, and my wife's salary and my disability allowance were not enough. It was hard to adjust to the new life. All my movements were limited and clumsy. I became increasingly irritable and inattentive. My own condition consumed me so much that I almost stopped paying attention to my wife and son. Kate, on the other hand, prioritized taking care of Pete, although she sometimes tried to help and support me. But I felt pathetic and useless, and I took it out on her. I realize now that I was doing the wrong thing and just feeling sorry for myself. It felt like I was continuing to ruin my own life. Every day my relationship with my wife was getting worse. The tension between us was only getting worse. Constant care of the house, child, and sick husband exhausted her strength. And scandals on my part and unwillingness to accept help put a stop to it. One evening, after another quarrel, she said she was leaving. It was only at that moment that I realized that I myself was to blame for this. I begged her to stay, but she was adamant. A week later, she packed her things and went with her son to her parents' house. I was left all alone, with debts and no family. But I knew I couldn't blame Kate. After a while, I started having problems at work. I continued to work remotely, but the company I was working for ran into financial difficulties. The management insisted that I leave of my own accord. As a result, I was left without my main source of income. My disability allowance was not enough to pay my debts and bills. I had to sell the house I once lived in with my family. Some of the money went to buy a small apartment and completely remodel it for me. The rest of it went to pay off my debts. My finances quickly approached a critical point. To pay the bills and buy the necessary medications, I turned to friends and relatives for support, but many of them turned away, believing that I was to blame for my own misfortunes. That's when my divorce from Kate took place. We didn't argue about the division of property. It happened quietly and too quickly. Before I knew it, it was over. Our breakup was good for Kate. She seemed much happier without me. All these events had a bad effect on me. Depression and despair set in. I stopped leaving the house, refused to socialize with anyone. I ignored calls from my son. I was ashamed to talk to him. I thought Pete didn't need such a pathetic father. Sometimes I woke up at night in tears, but I had no energy for anything. Every day was the same, and one of those days I got a call from Troy, an old acquaintance. Through our mutual friends, he had heard rumors about my situation. Unexpectedly, he offered me a remote job at his company. I declined, feeling useless, but he insisted. It wasn't easy at first. Getting used to the new rhythm and responsibilities took a lot of time and effort, but I kept going. Gradually, I managed to get into the work process. For a year, I worked for Troy and life seemed to be getting better, but I still felt lonely and useless. I would call my son and ex-wife from time to time, but I wouldn't let them visit me. I felt ashamed of all my past behaviors, unable to get over myself to make things right in any way. After another 6 months, Kate insisted on seeing me without her son. This request alarmed me, and for good reason. It turned out that she had been seeing another man for some time and was about to get married. Pete had also become attached to him and started calling him daddy. When I got home from my meeting with Kate, I lay down on the bed and did nothing. I was completely empty inside. All my thoughts and emotions disappeared at once. I don't know how long it lasted, but at some point I fell asleep. The sleep was deep and very long, as if I had fallen back into a coma. I think I would have liked that at the time, but unfortunately I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Troy. I didn't have the energy to answer it, so I just continued to lie there and stare at the ceiling. I realized that I was letting him down, that I would probably get fired after something like this, but it seemed so insignificant. A month went by like that. I stopped getting in touch with anyone. Troy tried to contact me for about another week or so, after which he stopped trying. Kate, after hearing about it, tried to call me as well, but I ignored her as well. I don't have the energy to fight myself and try to get out of this situation. I put myself here, and if I had been stronger, this wouldn't have happened. But all the chances are gone. The others will be much better off without me. I've lost all my friends. I've lost my wife and my son. I've lost even myself, and I don't want to continue this empty existence anymore. I just wanted to share my story so that no one will repeat my mistakes. Because I won't be able to fix them anymore.